So, thank you very much for coming along today. It's a real pleasure to be here. We were just talking about my memories of this theatre. I've come here a few times when productions have come here, but also seen shows. And, my wife actually was in the Euston off years ago in a show, and we came and camped out Bath for a while. So it's kind of full of strange and pretty good memories, really. So Macbeth, I'll crack into it. So for me, whenever I start thinking about a production, there are a couple of questions. It's not a formal thing, but there are a couple of questions that I try and answer one way or another. The first is the personal. Why me? Why should I direct the show? Why would the writer want me to do it? What's my personal connection to the material? And the second is to do with resonance, prescience. Why now? Why do this play now? And if I can kind of get an understanding of those two things, then that is the foundation for how to do it. So why first, then how. In terms of the why, on a personal level, like many people, and obviously like most young people at the moment, it was a play that I studied at school, and enjoyed very much in a I suppose, if I'm honest, in an education where I didn't really appreciate Shakespeare, I didn't really get it, but that was a kind of standout. I found the play very immediate and compelling. And I saw a very one of those pivotal moments in my sort of theatre history. I saw a touring production by a company called Cherub Theatre Company at Kidderminster College of Further Education, which really sort of piqued my interest in directing, actually. And even though I didn't start directing until much later, looking back on it, I think that was a really key moment, seeing that production of how the director interpreted or staged the play and how it held it, like Shakespeare does, how it held itself up to be sort of immortal, really, in quite a radical take on it. So that was the connection to the material. On top of that, my father was a medieval historian in terms of his sort of hobby, so I grew up with a very deep love of medieval history. I spent most of my childhood abroad. So the idea of Britain was a sort of distant, slightly rose-tinted one for most of my childhood, and often I'd see it through the prism of a sort of medieval, through a medieval prism, which obviously is not entirely accurate. And also, my partner is Scottish, and she comes from the east coast of Scotland, which is where the play is set. So I have a very deep connection to that part of the world and spend a lot of time there. When the opportunity allows. So there's various personal ways into it. Also, because the play is about many things, but it's in one respect it's about the pressures of leadership and how those pressures bring to bear on what is, by Shakespeare's standard, a very strong marriage at the beginning of the play. And I'm in a very strong marriage that is trying to rebuff the pressures of leadership at the moment. So there's a bit of kind of prescience in that for me. In terms of the sort of wider, more political or socio-political resonant aspect, I think we're in an age where we understand more about leadership and the corruption of leadership. Because of the information, globalization, and just the internet these days. I do think we're in quite a political age at the moment. It might not feel like it, but I think probably young people are more engaged with politics due to Brexit and Trump and the information that they can get hold of than I was when I was the age that my children now are at. I think sometimes also you just make work that is literally to do with where you are. You know, when my kids were young, I did a lot of family shows. My youngest son has just finished, just done his GCSEs, where he was studying Macbeth. My oldest son graduated on Friday, and he was doing English, and classics were obviously a big part of that. So it's quite interesting that while they're studying it, it comes to the fore for me. But yes, so the corruption of leadership at the moment, ambition, the nature of it. You know, you don't have to look very far to see political skullduggery going on left, right, and centre. And also, it's, you know, there are the pragmatic things that this plays on the syllabus for most young people. I think if I had to say what I think the most important issue is at the moment for the arts in this country, it's absolutely arts and education. That is that we are in a for me a very negative age, where the policies of not just the current administration but respective ones have really denigrated creativity in our schooling system, and so any opportunity to give young people a chance to see rather than just read in terms of the work, the drama that they're studying is something to be taken. So it felt like a very important time for us as a national theatre to be doing this play, and also to be doing it nationally, which is really important. I'll come on to that a little bit later. So if that's a sort of personal and socio-political context, then that leads on to how to do it. And of course, the most important thing there to do is to you know, the form has to come from the content. What was Shakespeare writing about? As I'm sure you all know, Macbeth was not his idea. He took it, like he did with many of his plays, from the Holinshed Chronicles. And Holinshed is writing in that version of Macbeth about 11th century Scotland, which was a period of time where, like all the way down the east and south of England as well, there was a state of some chaos, at times near anarchy, with the invasions from the Vikings and the Danes constantly coming in on the east, rebellions, people taking different sides. You know, we had a huge, you know, hundreds of years where Danelaw existed, where, you know, deals were made. And so the context that Shakespeare sets up, the end of a civil war, where different people have swapped sides, and there's no security, and what social order there is under a huge amount of pressure, obviously was very key in that time. It's funny, people, you know, when you think of Shakespeare, you think of 1606, the play was written, and it's, you know, to do it properly you would set it in that period, but Macbeth was not set in that period. Macbeth was set much earlier. And so in terms of how to do it now, you go, well, how do we make sense of that in terms of that anarchy and disruption and civil war? It's also, on top of the political, there's the metaphysical, because that's a huge part of the play. This country, by which I mean Britain, has been Christian for a very, very long time. You've got to go quite a long way back before the sort of our spiritual, deeper history, paganism, or you know, the green man, a real connection with nature through our spiritual belief system. You've got to go quite a long way back, or possibly a little way forward, when there is civil war or anarchy, chaos. Then superstition does tend to come to the fore. If you look at what went on, really in any warfare situation where it's much more about the survival of the most adaptable. In that situation, then superstition comes right up. It's interesting that Shakespeare, that Macbeth, when he writes to Lady Macbeth, he doesn't say, "You never guess what? I met a witch." He goes, "I met the witches and they said this." So the fact that there are these entities out there, however you portray them, is to a degree normal. there are lots of other aspects to it, the PTSD or the sort of wildness of that landscape during that time. But there is definitely a connection that I can see to the Green Man and our sort of deeper pagan belief systems, as I said. And then on the personal front, Shakespeare is just immortal. It's just the most fantastic anatomy of a relationship that comes apart under pressure. Macbeth's how his world closes in on him as the consequences of his initial actions and the ambition or survival that fueled that take a grip. I think you could probably, in that respect, set it in any period. So with that in mind, we thought also, what are young people looking at now? How are they going to relate to it? If one of the main reasons to put it on is to speak to the young people that we want to come and see it, as well as the people who know and love the play. Their references are Syria, or a few years back the Balkans, or the Congo, Afghanistan, the power vacuum that exists in Libya at the moment. And obviously a lot of the consequences that we're seeing, the refugee crisis, these are things which are very current in people's imaginations. Because Shakespeare is so brilliant, for me it does transpose to that environment very successfully. It's also a period where we know that the ecological consequences of this age are going to be severe in whatever way that comes about. And if you look at areas of conflict around the globe, that is often very, very present. You can burn all the fields and you can move all the people out, but the plastic will remain. The burning of oil fields or whatever, it does leave a trail of devastation, which in many cases will take decades and decades to put right. And I'm fairly widely travelled, and it's very profound. The sort of poorer or more chaotic the environment that I go into, the more you just see these places that are built on layers of plastic, where there is no refuse, where there's no grid, where there's no internet. These things come to the fore. So that was our thinking in deciding to set it now, marginally in the future. If the national grid went down tomorrow or right now, and the internet went down, Bath would be a completely different place inside a week, and in a year it would be unrecognisable. So that's kind of the in a potted version of looking at it, and one of the challenges with the piece is that Macbeth has one line before he meets the witches. I'll get it wrong. So fair and foul a day I have not seen, I think he says, and then they're there. So normally in a play you have a period of normality. Romeo is fighting about with his mates, in love with Rosalind, and should we go to the party? Queen Mab, all of that. And then he goes to the party, and then he sees Juliet. So you're 10-15 minutes into the play before the play really starts. And that is the normal shape of a play. In Macbeth, it's not. You've got one line, and then they're there, and then you're into it. So what felt really important to me is to set it in a context where it's really clear that the play is also about survival. It's not just about ambition. Because if it's just about ambition, then they're just rich people killing other rich people, and that isn't very interesting. I mean, it's interesting to a degree, but it's hard to relate to. In a situation of chaos, we would all individually be faced with some very difficult choices. So to crank the pressure up on that, I hope, gives a sense of gives a sense that this is not normal. This is a time where radical action is often the only course of action. There's a key moment in Act 1, Scene 4, when Duncan, who is by all measures, I mean, he's obviously a very nice man. People like him. He's honourable, but he's a weak king. If you look at Ethelred the Unready or various of the kings whose names we've forgotten in that period, who spent their whole time trying to stave off or buy loyalty from this or the other. He is one of those, and the decision that he makes in that one scene 4, which is to say, well, you're a fantastic thane, you've done really brilliantly, you're also a great thane, Banquo, you're wonderful, I'm now going to give the kingdom to my son. And all we know about Malcolm is that he got captured, and Macbeth, or the sergeant, rescued him from that. So, in a time where you need strong martial leadership, Malcolm is probably the worst possible choice. So to try and get a sense that among all the thanes, they'd all be going, well, that isn't going to last. Here we go again. Somebody's got to step up. And the witches spy that Macbeth is the one who's going to be most prone to doing that. So that's the sort of context of trying to get survival in the frame as much as ambition. From then on, you go into the process. I worked with Ray Smith, who's a wonderful designer, whose work you'll probably know from Warhorse, this house, various other shows, and we started to look at two things, really, what that ecological landscape would be like, and the landscape of Scotland. So it is grim, it's dark, the environment that we've created. Also within that, the play is challenging, because even though it's epic, you've got the heath, you've got the witches, you've got this warfare going on. It's also very, very intimate. There's a lot of two-handers. It's very, very intimate kind of dissection of a marriage and two separate psyches. So trying to find a way that we could iris out and in again, particularly in the Olivier where the play started, was a key part of thinking about that. Also, in terms of the aesthetic, there's something about this question of adaptability which we've also tried to celebrate. It's quite a homemade world. If nothing is being produced, and food is difficult to come by, and water and electricity and weapons, the ammunition is all run out. One of the things we did was to look at the sort of the homemade weapons that were formed in the trenches during the First World War, where people had often run out of ammunition, or it was much more hand to hand. Once you lost your bayonet, what are you going to fashion out of a spoon or a ladle or whatever you can get hold of? And some of it's very brutal. We had one moment. It's not a secret that one of the actors that we had in the cast of Macbeth at the Olivier is a terrific actor who'd spent most of his adult life at Her Majesty's leisure, I think is probably the expression, but had come from a very, very harsh and challenging background. And we were saying, armour, what's his armour going to be? What is your armour in prison in that environment? And he said, yellow pages. I said, what? What do you mean? He said, well, if you're in your cell and you know you're going to the dinner queue and somebody's after you and you might get stabbed, you keep a supply of tape if you can get it, and magazines, and you strap the magazines around your body, because nothing will go through yellow pages. Which is quite interesting, isn't it? You just go, so in fact that's what happens. Macbeth put straps on, a bit of padded cardboard made out of, so through rehearsals we were just strapping Rory up with Woman's Own or whatever happened to be around. Hello magazine. So that kind of thinking also was going into it, to try and get a sense of what life might be like, where you've just got to make it up.
Got about 2 minutes.
Okay, good. Well, we're doing fine. And then I suppose the other thing to just talk about is that we're a national theatre. For me, obviously, my first responsibility in running that place is to make sure that we make good theatre. That's what will get me fired if the shows aren't any good, and if people don't come. And that's very, very compelling pursuit, obviously, but equally important to every degree is that we're supposed to be national, and to my view, many of our national arts institutions have not been national enough. I think there's been a really clear signal from the protest vote that was Brexit, whatever you think about it, that the inequality of opportunity and breakdown of community across the country is something which has made people very angry. And I think as arts organisations, we have a responsibility to respond to that, to make sure we step up and earn that national part of our title. And there are a number of ways of doing that, and a number of ways that we're trying to address that. One of which is representation. By setting the play in the modern era, you can go to Glasgow or Edinburgh or any of the major Scottish cities, and you will see a version of the diversity that you see all over the country. So it's very important to me that the casting of the play represented the people that we mix with around the country in portraying a modern environment and a modern Scotland. It's also interesting, knowing Scotland quite well, it's very clear that Shakespeare never went there. And so some of his geography is, there's no way that Macbeth, wherever he was, whether he's in Dunsinane or Inverness, there's no way that he could travel down to England without travelling through Fife, which is where his wife and family are. So anyway, but putting that aside, it felt very important that we represent the country in that sense, and then of course, most importantly, that we then take the show out and make it fit for all the fantastic theatres that are around the country. And it's really exciting to be doing that, but it's also great for me because it gives us an opportunity to relook at what we made and try and improve it, try and develop ideas, try and make it more accessible, and just move that journey on. So it's I'm very intrigued to see how it goes down around the country and how it fits into all the very very different theatres that we're going into, and particularly to see how it plays with the young people from all over the country who are studying it. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight. But if anyone's got any questions on any front.
Yeah, hi, Graham Wells, Stage Talk magazine. You mentioned this is your second bash at it. So, given that you're having a second bite at the cherry, what do you think you might be bringing to it second time round that you left out first time at the National?
I mean, there are all sorts. There are certain things about. I can't and have no intention of ducking the question which some of you may be asking, which is how do you feel about the fact that the national press would not warm about the production? And there are, after the initial kind of ouch of that and the frustration of it, because actually the production in the Olivier, I felt was very, very clear. It sold out. We did fantastic business there, and the many letters and responses I got to the show, the 10 most negative happened to be published, which was frustrating. But beyond that, you can sit back and go, okay, well, what was it that divided opinion about it? Putting it into a proscenium arch, which is what we're doing for the most part, presents various visual opportunities which you can't do in the Olivier. The Olivier is a really particular space, so we've had to reconceive it, and that gives an opportunity to develop certain ideas and to highlight, to focus that question of its intimacy. The play's intimacy a lot of the time is really key, and in a landscape like the Olivier, it's quite difficult to do that. In proscenium arches, I think that's going to be much more successful. So that's a kind of a staging exercise, really. The one area that I would like to turn the volume up on a bit is the witches. There's a sort of, they're very tricky, the witches. Most people probably know James I wrote a play about witches at the time. There is a misogyny and you know, Shakespeare was, as ever, writing under commission, so he was writing to appease the push that was happening under James's rule during a time when magic and mathematics were separating out. The idea of science was developing, and there was a lot of demonization of anything seen to do with witchcraft or magic. And I think there's a way that we can develop the kind of central idea of our witches, that they're deeply connected to the environment that they're in, that they're outsiders and they've adapted and they've survived,